Thank you. So we're going to get into this really quickly. This part is in 3 talks. First of all, we're going to start out with a talk that we think sucks. And then we're going to do a second talk, which is basically explaining exactly why that talk sucked. And then we have a longer section where we go through several ideas that we have about elements that contribute to better talks. So why are we here? Because we give a lot of these things, and it turns out we have a lot of opinions about what makes things good in talks, as also what makes things suck in talks. Why are you here, especially on a Sunday afternoon? So maybe some of you give tech talks, in which case maybe they're awesome, maybe they're not. I don't know. We'll just carry on. But I think most of you probably need the ability to communicate in a business context or even a personal context to a group of people. I believe pretty strongly that all of the things that I do in tech talks contribute to the other things that I do in life, whether it's articulating a point to my manager or in a meeting or in a tech talk or in a comedy talk. I think all of these things all work together to build the confidence and capability for someone to communicate and articulate ideas.
And actually, you know, there's also a selfish reason. We go to a lot of Android conferences, and I would say we're a little bit part of the problem, but it's always the same speakers. So we'd like to see more people, different people, go on stage and give talks. I'm sure you have a lot of things to say that we don't know about. So if that can help you do that, please do it. Like, you know, you have to start somewhere. Go give your first talk. It's pretty scary, but it's also pretty fun. And then 12 years later, you're still doing it.
Bonjour. Je m'appelle Chet Haase, et il s'appelle
Romain Guy.
Welcome to J2 XDB Technology Assessments, developers specifications in the early 21st century. I'm a technical architect in MSE and obviously LLQ for the N2 Corporation.
And I'm the co-founder. I lead the processor, obviously. I'm the CTTO, also obviously. And I'm a member of the IEEE.
I'd like to tell you a little bit about ourselves. I have a bachelor's in mathematics, master's in computer science. I did go to high school, and I've been working in programming for quite a few years. I have worked at many technology companies and on several different software platforms, and I've spoken at many conferences like this. I don't have any outside interests, which I think qualifies me to do talks like this.
I am Monsieur Guy. I have a bachelor in computer science, also a master in computer science. I went to high school, too. He had a long career in programming, I had a shorter one. I worked at one company. I worked on one platform. I also speak at many conferences, and my favorite hobby is being French.
I think it's good for people to understand the important agenda of this important talk. So first of all, we'll cover the title of the talk. Then we'd like to tell you about the speakers. We'd like to go over the agenda. Then we'll be discussing some deep and technical things and showing some charts and data to represent those ideas. Finally, we'll explain some things and conclude, and we hope that there's time for questions and answers. We covered the title.
We covered the speakers.
And that was the agenda. Section 1, in which many important things are covered, such as the development of the thesis.
Covered, the act of addressing or covering a topic. It's in the past tense.
Development is an ongoing process or a situation unfolding progressively over time. And thesis is the premise.
Which all logical conclusions are based. The premise was thought to have developed in Athens, but was further refined by the Stoics in Sparta.
Hang on, there's a footnote. Stoics were a philosophical movement in Sparta. Stoics were known for being rational and emotionless.
And the rest is pretty obvious.
We expect you to study these slides later, as befits their gravity. Back to the agenda. We can see that we've covered some deep and technical things. Now we'd like to go over some charts and data. Here's one now. I think that's pretty obvious. And then one that's slightly more involved.
This one doesn't quite fit on the screen, but you can infer what's missing. It is obvious, too. So now I want to talk about the distribution term for the bidirectional reflectance function of cloth in the Cook-Torrance microfacet model for physically based shading. So here we calculate the geometric distribution based on the view vector and the light vector and the normal vector and the alpha value, because there's an alpha up there somewhere.
On the next slide, you see the following equation. Hey, Romain, that looks really complicated.
It is.
Maybe you could explain it to everyone.
I would be happy to. In this equation, we solve for V, the visibility, using L, the light vector, and V, the V vector, and alpha is still there.
2 is the number 2.
And 0.5 is 1.5.
And finally, everything on the right side is divided into 0.5. So now we visualize that. Back to the agenda. We can see that we've had some charts and data, and we'd like to explain some things.
We like feedback to become better speakers, so please fill out the session survey at the end of the talk.
We have a URL. Might be easier to just type that in.
Please write it down.
Got it? Back to the agenda. We've explained some things. On to the conclusion. We think it's very important to have a call to action. And we believe that everyone should do stuff with technology.
If you want to know more, you can go to this address.
That was the conclusion. And now on to Q&A. But before we do that, let's talk about why that was horrible. I think a lot of it is obvious. Here are some things. Oh my God, what an awful title. Jargon. If not everybody in the audience knows exactly what the speaker is talking about, then you're going to lose them in the first sentence. Not only that, but holy crap, what a lot of words, right? The speaker is obviously trying to prove how intelligent they are by the number of letters they have in each word, as opposed to actually communicating what the talk will be about.
Yeah, we had an example that was a long time ago. Do you remember the exact title? That wasn't ours, but we can make fun of it.
So the context was we wrote a book called Filthy Rich Clients, which kind of, it implied exactly what it was about. It translates into French really poorly.
It's very funny in English.
It works in English. But it told people what the topic was technically, and it also had a little bit of fun. About 3 months later, the same publisher came out with a book called something like Kicking Butt with EJB 2.0 and MRX.
That doesn't work. Don't do that.
Okay. So, yeah, watch the jargon, watch the big words, try to make it actually understandable by everybody. Nobody cares what your titles are. I don't care if I have a PhD. You don't care if I have a PhD, or what my official title is in my company.
Some people care they have a PhD.
Okay. You may care if you have it, but the audience probably won't. And if you go out of your way to tell them that you have it, they probably will care even less about it.
Yeah, right. Be humble. The audience is here for the content, not for the speaker.
The important thing is for the audience to understand why they should be listening to you. This is not how many degrees you have, but why you are an expert in the field. But that can be communicated very, very quickly. I can say, I'm about to give a talk on Android. I lead the Android UI toolkit team. That is all they need to know.
Or sometimes you say that you have the microphone. That is not a skill, you know.
But sometimes that's all it takes. Same thing goes for the About the Speaker slides. Often you'll get templates from conference organizers where they say, okay, here are all the types of slides you should have in your presentation, and one of them is about the speaker. And one of the first things that we do in a presentation is delete that slide, because again, they do not care. You can tell them very quickly why you are an authority to speak to this matter, and then move on.
So here's one trick about templates. If you ever give a talk at a conference, you will most likely get a template. You do not have to use the template. Do what's best for your talk, do what's best for you, do what's best for the audience. If the template works, that's fantastic. You can also modify the template. That's okay too.
Formality doesn't really do a lot for you. Why not actually be one of the crowd instead of somebody that's trying to make themselves to be more important?
Unless you're a consultant, maybe. Who's a consultant here?
Everybody raises their hand.
Not me.
Okay, so same thing for Monsieur Guy. Onto the agenda. Okay, so all talks should have a flow. It should be understandable to the audience where you're beginning, where you're ending, and how you got there, right? Because you want a mental model. The most important thing is for you to bring the audience along with you so that they can learn. So if you can remove complexity of like, what the hell is the speaker talking about now, it helps them in understanding. So absolutely have a flow, have some sort of outline that you're covering, but it doesn't necessarily have to be explicit. You don't have to write an agenda slide. Sometimes you may, if it's not clear and you really do want them to have the mental model, but otherwise the agenda can simply be implicit. Again, it's something we see in a lot of presentation templates and a lot of presentations, and it doesn't necessarily have to be there.
What you can have, however, is between the sections, you can have one slide with just a title or a picture that marks the beginning of the next section. You don't have to talk about what you just talked about.
Okay, so there were a couple of things going on when we covered this slide. One is just the sheer amount of information there was way too much. We'll talk about this later when we're talking about material, but basically simplify the information you're putting onto a slide. Here's the dynamic. The presenter is speaking, and then a slide like this comes on the screen. Humans have a single core processor for understanding language. So as soon as that slide comes up, that text is way more interesting than the speaker they've already been listening to, because like we will like to read things. And so they're going to tune you out and they're going to start reading your slide. Right? Well, chances are you have much more interesting things to say, much more meaningful and educational things than the stuff that you happen to write in the bullets, but they don't know that because they're reading your slide.
Well, you also have to be useful to the audience. I've seen just last week someone read the bullets on the screen, and I can read a lot faster than most speakers can talk. So in that situation, why are you on stage? Why can't I just read the slides myself whenever I want to? Oh, and also to be clear, some of the things we used to do ourselves. We used to have agenda slides, and Chet used to have a lot of text on these slides. I would spend a lot of time removing that text.
I did have the philosophy about 10 to 15 years ago that my slides should stand alone after the fact. So if you couldn't happen to be in the room with us, then you could look up the slides and get all of the important information. I don't believe that anymore. I think if you can't be bothered to be in the room or to watch the recordings that are usually available, then I don't know why I went to the extra effort. More importantly, made it harder for the people in the room to understand it because there was too much information on the slide. So, way too much density on the slide, but the other thing that we did on this slide, which we really hate, is don't read bullets.
And you just read the bullets.
Just trying to demonstrate through exception. So, yeah, A, don't have all that information there, and B, oh my God, can't you find something more interesting to say than whatever it was you wrote at midnight last night? So, back to the agenda. Okay, if there's data, so data is good to communicate ideas. Try to make it obvious. What were those units over there? Why are we talking about months here? Like, there was no explanation of this stuff. Maybe you think it's obvious because you've been working with this boring data for a very long time, but the audience probably did not. Even more so here. What the hell is going on in this graph? Yeah, I've seen graphs like this in presentations. It's not very good. Okay, so there were a couple of things going on there with the equations. One was, again, the density of information, the title of that slide. They're not even going to get through the title by the time you move on to the next slide here. The other was a combination of like reading the information that was on the slide and trying to remember, let's see, I scripted what I was going to say here at the time, and all of it distracts from actually teaching them what they need to know on the slide, right? That was just like a jumble of words on the slide, jumble of words coming out of your mouth, sorry.
As always.
So it didn't communicate much information. On to the other one, related equation here. There were, again, a couple of things going on there, complexity of information and title, way too much. But what we were also doing was something, I really enjoy giving presentations with co-presenters. In particular, I really like giving them with someone that's equally as comfortable and spontaneous on stage as I am. Not only do I now not know what's going to come out of my mouth, I have no idea what he's going to say.
And me neither.
So it makes for a really exciting presentation for me because I don't know what's going to go on up here.
It's a surprise every time.
So other people do this sometimes, and they'll have a co-presenter, and they feel very uncomfortable on stage to begin with, and they really feel uncomfortable not knowing what that other person might say. So then they script the interaction back and forth, which is horrible, horrible, horrible.
Unless you're a very, very good actor.
And we are not. That's not why we got into software, right? So then you start doing things like, well, then you memorize your script and you repeat it very poorly, or you end up just reading the notes because you can't think in the moment, and then both non-actors are reading the notes and doing a canned interaction, and it's just bad. Don't. Let's see, pointless information.
A lot of conferences will ask you to put this somewhere in your presentation. Don't.
And then
sorry for people who organize conferences around here.
Again, information that doesn't need to be there. Same thing with the next slides, the call to action. It's very common for people to have these. Sometimes there actually is a call to action, but it does become a meme, something that presenters think that they have to do, like call to action is go out and use the API. Like, why did you waste their time on this slide? That's implicit through the entire presentation. And then finally, I just like making fun of QR codes. Q&A. So
nobody tried to take a picture of the QR code. Oh, you know, maybe it leads to something really cool.
I have no idea.
Now it's too late. You will never know. What does it do, by the way?
I have no idea. It's probably from an airplane ticket. Okay. I think airlines are the only company still locked on.
You can go back to San Francisco in our stead with this QR code.
So Q&A is very interesting. I think one of the most important things you can do, as we'll see a little bit later, is engage the audience, actually be part of the conversation in the room. And Q&A is a great way to do that. We take random questions, we try to answer them, sometimes we don't answer them, but we are having a conversation in real time with real people back and forth. That's great. However, sometimes you devote a little too much time to Q&A and you're basically boring everybody else in the audience. Right, so the engagement is really good, but the actual information going back and forth can be very anecdotal and specific to the people that are asking the questions. So what we like to do is have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, but not too much. There was a conference we were at 4 years ago, which I'll call, I don't know, Google I/O. And the organizers said, okay, you have 45 minutes, you should speak for 30, and then you should have 15 minutes for Q&A. And we immediately ignored them, and we went all the way to 45, because that was a waste of time. Right? I don't want to spend 1/3 of the time that we have on stage imparting information to only the 7 or 8 people that were able to ask a question in that time slot.
And something else to consider is that not everybody in the audience is comfortable speaking in public. So what we've noticed is sometimes it's very hard, even when we have a few minutes left for Q&A, very few people will ask questions, and sometimes nobody will ask questions, but as soon as we turn off the mics, everybody comes to ask us questions. And it's perfectly okay. You don't have to ask your question in public. So, you know, leave a few minutes if you can. If you don't, that's okay. And then you have the rest of the conference or the rest of the day or, you know, half hour after the talk to handle questions.
Okay, so random tips. So there's 2 buckets that we've organized this under. We think of the material, the actual slides that you're creating there, some ideas around that, and then information about you, the presenter, the style.
Speaking of slides, I didn't try here, but those are ugly, ugly slides. You should do something better. But I've been trying for years and years. Just so much work to go after Chet and fix his slides. Sometimes I just give up.
I do not create beautiful slides. However, I do create simple slides. So you'll notice all of these are very sparse.
Simplistic.
So this is the point about having a flow. There should be some sort of sense that there is a beginning and a middle of end. It's not just a scattershot of ideas out there. I have had presentations. There are exceptions to all of these rules, obviously. I've had presentations that tend to be more of a scattershot, but you really should have more of a flow that the audience can actually understand. Speaker notes. So we touched on this a little bit earlier. I kind of believe pretty strongly that either you shouldn't have notes, or if you do, they should be incredibly sparse. And the reason is this. I noticed I write speaker notes when we're developing a talk because I want to get my ideas down, and that's a convenient place for me to write that information. And then I may think, oh, I want to say a paragraph, something like this, you know, with the following ideas in it, and it'll be like 2 or 3 sentences there, maybe some, you know, bullet points in different paragraphs or whatever it is. And then I would be up on stage with Romain, and I would look at the monitor, and I would see the speaker notes, and there would be this block of text, and I would have a choice. I could either ignore it and just make up what I was going to say anyway, or I could actually break what I was saying, read that information, parse it, understand it, and then regurgitate what it was trying to say.
And in practice, for most of our talks, we do not have speaker notes at all, but for some of them, we do. And like Chet said, we should actually show them sometime. There's just a few words, so they're the key points we want to hit. And sometimes while we're going to the next slide, we see something we forgot to talk about. That's okay, we just ignore it, we keep going. It's the best thing to do.
Yeah, I would rather forget that point, but keep the conversation flow and keep the audience engaged at a time, rather than remember everything, but deliver it in a really disjointed manner that loses the audience anyway. Let's see. Sparse slides, we talked about this before. Minimize the information that you have on the slide. One point related to speaker notes, though, is that allow the information on your slides to be the bullets that you would have put in your speaker notes, right? I put just enough information in the slides to remind me what I wanted to talk about. Those are basically my speaker notes, right? So even if it's just like a simple image.
And unless you've done something terribly wrong when you submitted your talk, you're probably an expert on the topic. And you know it by heart. You have conversations about it every day at work, or probably outside of work, boring your partner. So it's the same thing when you're on stage, in front of an audience. All you need is enough on the slide to remind yourself of what you want to say, and then you just launch into an endless discussion, and then you have to look at the audience, because sometimes they start nodding off, and they're like, okay, I need to shut up. I've seen my wife do that, so that's when I stop talking. So you know what to do now if you want to stop talking.
Be your wife. Okay, so
that is not what I meant, Chet. We already had the discussion. Like, stop.
So sometimes there is a lot of complicated information that you have to have on a slide or a series of slides, but gradual reveals help do that. So one of the problems I've seen that's very common is you might have 6 bullet items or 6 different topics that you're trying to talk about on a particular slide, and they all need to be there because they're related, whatever it is. If you put all of them on the slide at the same time, the audience will start reading and they will be down on the 6th item when you're still up talking about the 1st or the 2nd. So make sure that the audience is actually following you in the same order, so you reveal them one by one. And you address that point, and then you go on to the next one, so that when they read, they can get it really quickly, because it's just that one small item that you just put the barest minimum amount of information.
Now, sometimes it makes things a little more difficult because you're hiding your notes to yourself, since they're not on screen yet. And we've done that many, many times, where we launch onto the discussion, we reveal a couple of bullets, then we keep talking, we forget to go to reveal the next bullets, and then we have to click 3 or 4 times before we're able to go to the next slide. But that's okay. You'll make a lot of mistakes when you give a talk. We make mistakes in every single talk. We're just talking about the 2 talks we gave today, this morning and yesterday, and I'm pretty sure we did none of what we talked about. But that's okay, just move on.
One of the overall points that I probably touch on later here is it's not that big a deal, right? One of the things that I think scares people about giving talks in public is getting all wrapped up in saying exactly the right thing at the right time. It's not that big a deal. You will make mistakes, and it's not that big a deal.
Yeah. Worst case scenario, you say something that you shouldn't have said, and you get fired.
And then the final point that I wanted to make on this slide is there. Similarly, you will sometimes have complex information to impart in things like code. So here I wanted to explain something in a technical talk about how I was doing an animation because I was affecting the layout parameters in a particular way in Android code, and this is the actual method that I use. But the thing is, your code on the slide does not need to compile. There is no requirement for running this code. What you really need...
Or if you compile your slides, I would love to talk to you.
What you really need is just the bare salient information that they needed to understand your point, right? A lot of that code that I had on that slide was repeated. It was just the same technique applied to different elements in the scene. So I can say, okay, it's important here to do this operation. You can use highlight to call things out in particular, to focus the viewer's eye on what you're trying to explain, and then you can show just the bare things that you're explaining, and you can have ellipses. Again, doesn't need to build. These are comment tags. It'll be fine.
But you should syntax colorize the code like you did not here.
Yes.
I kept my mouth shut just to shame you on stage.
Thanks. I am not shamed.
I know you're not.
It's all okay. Simplify your text. People feel that punctuation and grammar is really important, which it is in life. This is not life, right? All you want is the barest information. So, for example, why do we have to have bullet items? If there's enough spacing between the lines, you can just remove that noise. No, it's not a lot of information, but every little bit helps, just to focus the user's attention on the actual important things. I know a lot of people that really enjoy putting complete sentences and periods at the end of theirs. Not very long. It's really kind of a horrible habit. It doesn't need to, again, it doesn't need to compile as a language either. It just needs to get the point across so that as they read that and listen to you, they understand that you are explaining that point. Okay, so jokes. I personally like presentations to be entertaining. I'm into comedy. I do comedy outside of these tech talks, and I love it when jokes land during a tech talk. However, I'm not there to tell jokes. More importantly, I don't actually know whether a joke will land. So apart from little visual gags like that, I don't script jokes into my talks because A, I'm not there to tell the joke, and B, I don't actually know if it's going to work until I say it, and then I don't want to be, okay. Years ago, I saw a presentation at Java 1 by somebody, and you could tell that someone told him it's really important to start with a joke, and so he did. And then he paused, because you could see, it probably said in his speaker notes, pause for laughter. So he told his joke, yeah, insert joke, pause for laughter, and he paused, and then just like that, just exactly like that. And the sweat just popped out and started running down his face, and he felt awful about his entire life. Because of that joke. And there was no reason for it.
And so I said several times already, move on.
Right.
We try a lot of jokes, a lot of them work, a lot of them do not work. Just move on. It's less painful for everybody involved.
So it's important to point out, like, jokes or humor in general and stories are really good ways of engaging an audience and getting points across and making people sort of entertained so they actually pay attention and don't go to sleep. This is, you know, some of the reasons why I like these things to be entertaining. So there is a reason for those there. However, unless you're actually a professional comedian, just be aware that that thing may not land, and either don't put it there, or if you do and it doesn't land, just move on.
Also, sometimes if you overdo it, people get distracted. So a couple of weeks ago, someone sent me a message on Twitter and said, I watched your Google I/O talk, it was not even funny. I'm like, that was not the point. I'm trying to teach you something. I'm sorry it was not funny this time, but that's not what I'm here for. I'm happy if you laugh, but that's not what we want.
Somebody else told me on Twitter that they listen to the Android podcast that I do with Tor, and they're not actually a developer and they don't really understand any of the technical information. They just listen to it because it's funny, and I thought, yay. Okay, so this is the section about you, about presentation style, which can be even more important than the way you craft your slides. One is project. I saw an excellent example of this very recently where the speaker was on stage, they were imparting information, they were loud enough to be heard, but they had absolutely zero energy. I'm speaking at a volume that's sort of uncomfortably loud for Romain up here, but it actually feels natural when you get used to it. Even though there's a microphone, I could speak very quietly, but if I do that, my energy goes way down and everybody kind of has to lean forward, and you're too lazy to do that, essentially. I should project and make it very clear when I'm articulating words and make it very clear that I have energy and passion about what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it conveys that you care about what you're talking about. One of the worst things, I think we're going to mention it again, but when someone is on stage, like our CEO, and they say, I am very excited. That doesn't work. At least pretend to smile, I don't know, something. Or jump, I don't know.
Use your body. There are a lot of pieces of information that are conveyed not just by your words or your content on the slides, but just by the physical gestures that you're using or the body language that you have. So if you're standing up here and you're sort of curved over your laptop and reading the speaker notes, they can tell that you're probably not very comfortable up there. If instead you're open and confident, then they can tell that obviously you're an expert in this material, you're having a good time up there, they're going to feel less sorry for you and more engaged with you to listen to what it is you're trying to say. Similarly, using gestures, if you're just like wildly waving your hands in the air, that's not really helping anything. If you're going to do that, you might want to just lock your hands down so that you're not doing that. Or if you're just sort of nervously pacing, that gets a little distracting, right? Then the audience is going to be focused on the weird movements that the speaker is doing instead of what they're actually saying at the time.
And when you give a talk with a co-speaker and it's not your turn to talk, it can feel very awkward to stand there and try to look like it's not awkward. It is awkward, and it will be awkward. Just deal with it.
I have been trying to figure out for years how to deal with that, and what I do now is just stare at him lovingly.
Chet, thank you.
So do whatever works for you. Eye contact, this can be tricky if there's like bright lights, you can't actually see the audience, but you know where they're sitting. One of the things that I was trying to do at the beginning of the really horrible talk earlier was to actually look up or down. So people will do this naturally. I will do it all the time when I am trying to remember or come up with the thing that I want to say, but then look back at the audience. This is who you're here for. You're not speaking to the ceiling, and your laptop already knows all this information.
Make eye contact, but sometimes you will break eye contact because you need to read a note, or like Chet said, you need to remember something. It's okay, you don't have to stare at the audience for the whole time, and that person is now very uncomfortable.
Yeah, make eye contact, don't be creepy. Be in the room. I started noticing a couple of years ago that I would do a common thing whenever I started talking. I did it here again today, and it helps me ease into a talk, but I also think it helps the audience sort of understand that we're all here together in the same conversation, which is being in the room. I will, instead of saying, my first words out of my mouth are, hello, I'm Chet Haase, I'm going to be speaking on Android today, here's the title of my talk. I'll actually comment on something in the room instead. The existence of the balloons or the food or whatever. The fact that I tripped getting up on stage, it doesn't matter, but it is me being in the room. Similarly, if something happens in the room, like a balloon pops or somebody has a question or whatever, go ahead and react to it and just help propagate that truism that you are there in the room. You are just another developer in the room with them, and you're part of the same conversation.
Something I like to do as well, you don't have to do it just at the beginning, you can do it during the talk. So very often we know people in the audience, and it's nice to have to call them out. For instance, if they have done something related to the topic at hand, we just did that last week at the Dev Fest Nantes, you can mention that one of them is in the room. Just helps show that you know who's here and you know who your audience is.
There's a common technique I've seen which can be a problem if you do it too much, which is doing a poll. I find it interesting to see how many people are using a particular thing that we're talking about, or how many people feel that this applies to them or whatever, but it can be a trick, and I try to avoid that. Like, I actually want to know how many people were developing on Android pre 1.0, and it's a really interesting piece of information for other people in the room. If, on the other hand, you're going to say, how many people like ice cream, right? And then you just go on. Like, obviously, that was just a trick because someone told you you're supposed to engage the audience. Don't do that. Be in the room, ask a real question, get a real answer, and actually react to it.
Yeah, and when we say be in the room, we don't mean to be in the room. We've seen a speaker do this once at Java. They go in the audience, and then they ask some random person to say something. Please say something.
Hello.
Thank you. And that's fine when you have someone who apparently doesn't mind speaking in public, but that can be very uncomfortable for that person who did not ask you for anything. So don't do that to them. Just stay here on stage. That's yours. It's big.
Yeah, maybe I should have said be in this part of the room. Be spontaneous. This came up before when we were talking about having a speaker, co-speaker rather. We do not memorize what it is, obviously. We don't memorize what it is we're going to say.
We don't know anything.
We don't script our talks. We know the content pretty well, but we don't script what it is we're going to say. The main reason for that is this is not our job. That would be a waste of our time. I don't have the time to do that. The rationalization is it makes what we say more spontaneous. Right? I know how to use at least this language. I don't know how to use your language very well, but I'm pretty confident that given a core idea, I am able to speak to that idea improvisationally, right? So I can be spontaneous in what I am saying without getting locked into some canned speech I was going to do.
And it's also part of, sometimes you have to react. Very few talks go as planned. Sometimes someone will interrupt or something will happen, and it helps to be used to reacting to whatever is going on. Sometimes it can be on the screen. So Chet mentioned that we don't rehearse at all. And it shows sometimes, because we try to divide the talk fairly, but sometimes we mess that up. Like I will take Chet's slide, and then he has to take my slide, and then you see a slide on screen, you have no idea what it is about. Move on.
Engage the audience. We've talked about this in a few different contexts. Basically, make sure that you're there for them. There are different ways of engaging the audience, but I feel very strongly that our presentations are about a conversation with the room. It's not me lecturing you behind a microphone, right? It's actually me talking with you. I happen to have a microphone now, but otherwise it is just a conversation. I would really rather be a part of that conversation than simply lecturing. Otherwise, I may as well just make a video instead.
Also because very often you know more than we do about the subject we're talking about. We just pretend we know more than you.
That's the key. Pretend. That should be another point in here. Just pretend.
Just pretend.
Be real. This relates to what Romain was saying earlier about executives saying, we are very excited today to announce the following. No, you're not excited at all. It's okay if you're not excited, but then don't tell me you're excited. Use words that actually match. He could have said, we're very sad today to announce the following product.
I am very bummed.
Watch the tone. This relates to the projection before, like being very monotone, speaking quietly, being, I'm an authority on this and I'm really important and therefore I'm going to speak like an intelligent authority. Like, no, that's not interesting at all. Like, articulate the words, actually emphasize the points you're trying to make and be loud enough and with enough energy that the audience can engage with that.
So consider having a co-speaker. We've been giving talks together for about 12 years now. I'm starting to change my mind, actually. It's good for many reasons. First, we believe that it makes the talk more dynamic. It's more engaging, more entertaining sometimes, often, apparently. Also, it really helps you. We'll be talking about something, we'll miss some of our notes, we'll forget to talk about an anecdote or to make one of the points we wanted to make, so your co-speaker can jump in and fill that gap. If they don't, that's okay. So, and apparently it's not very common the way we do it, because very often when we show up on stage and people give us the mics, they're like, oh, so who's going to speak first? We don't know who's going to speak first. We don't know who's going to speak last. We just want the mics to be on at all times. So yeah, have a co-speaker. It has to be someone you're comfortable with. We had to be comfortable together the first time, because there was a first time. I don't remember how it worked out. I'm sure it was awkward.
Probably. So often you will either need to or want to give a talk with a co-speaker, and either you do not have the same presentation style with them or the same comfort style, or you don't know. And that's also acceptable. However, you should probably break it into sections then. Like the way that we go back and forth now only works because we have a pretty good sense of when the other is going to jump in and say something, and that's totally fine, and we're flexible, and I can shut down and he can say something or whatever. But if you don't know that other person that well, then you should probably have sections of the talk that one person delivers and then the next person. And the trick there is to figure out a transition that is actually real. It's very common for co-speakers that are not very comfortable on stage to do the following. Like, he will finish his presentation, and then I will come on stage and I will say, thank you, Romain. Well, look at him, right? Like, why am I thanking you when I'm actually saying that to him? Just be real in the transition. Don't script the transition. Just say something real to that person, or nothing at all. That's still more real than saying something fake. Yeah,
and the worst one, I think, the worst scripted one is when the back and forth is every line of dialogue. It's like, oh, gee, Chet, what are we learning today? Awkward pause.
Yeah, I saw scripted jokes in a presentation at a conference years ago. It was not a good thing for anybody.
It was painful. Yeah. You can see them in keynotes even sometimes. It's extra painful.
Yes. Come prepared, by which I don't mean rehearse and script. I mean come prepared enough. We know our material really well, usually. We know the background of the material. We wrote the slides. We went over the slides a couple of times to remind ourselves what was going on there, especially any complicated bits like code. We also know what is behind the material, the code that we're talking about. So we are prepared to speak to all of the topics that are represented in the slide.
But
that's what we
But being prepared enough is something very, very personal. There are a lot of books on how to give presentations, and one of the reasons we never send people towards those books or those talks or whatever is because they give you rules. Do what makes you comfortable. We hate rehearsing. I think that would be the worst thing we could do to give a talk. So we write the slides at the last minute, we just go over them really quickly to get an idea of who's going to say what, and that's about it. That's how we like to do it. There are other people, other speakers who are ridiculously good at rehearsing and acting the talk. But the way they do it is they don't rehearse twice. They rehearse like 30, 40 times. And for instance, I hate rehearsing, but for a keynote, I was part of a couple of keynotes at Java 1 or Google I/O. I will rehearse 20, 30 times to make sure that we're going to stay within the time limit, that I'm going to hit the right points, and because that's a very different event. So just adapt to the situation, but do what makes you feel good.
I do believe that practice is really important, but I mean something different from rehearsing that presentation. Instead, I mean get up in front of a crowd and do something. Give a talk at work.
Not on the street, that's creepy and weird.
Also, it's called mime, and then you're not speaking at all. And then what are you learning? But I've learned a lot of stuff by doing comedy talks, either improv or stand-up, or these satire talks, or tech talks, or Toastmasters. Do you have Toastmasters here? Like, there are these organizations that give practice talks in order to give people practice giving talks. Anything will do to give you the confidence that you can do this thing, the practice that you need to have that confidence. Rehearse enough. This relates to what Romain was just talking about. I came up. What's that?
There was an intro to your beautiful chart.
So here's some fake data I created. So there are these people, I know some presenters who are excellent at doing this thing, and they rehearse the hell out of their talks. And here's my fake data. Here's the way it goes. The first time they give that talk, I think it sucks because they decided all of the words that they should say, and the first time they're saying that, it's going to come out very canned, because they haven't really memorized it in a very natural way yet, right? And that's going to continue for some unknown length of time, and then eventually it starts getting a little bit better because they've done it so many times that it starts getting more natural until finally at the end, and this is what stand-up comedians do essentially, they work that joke over and over and over again. By the time you see them on stage or in some special, they've done it hundreds of times, and it comes out of their mouth like they just made it up because they've memorized it and rehearsed it enough that it's natural, and that's when it's perfect.
And another side effect is that if you rehearse the talk, you have a fairly good idea of what you're going to say, and we've seen many speakers mess up. They forget, one of the things they wanted to say, but they know that they forgot something, and you can see them on stage like looking really bad, and they're trying to decide, should I go back and talk about it? Should I keep going forward? And it becomes really terrible and awkward. In our situation, because we don't know what we're going to say, when we forget to say something, it's okay. We don't even know that we forgot to say something, so we can just keep moving on. That's really the real reason why we do it this way.
So the fake data I have for us, this green line sort of represents us. It's sort of an Android green. I think this talk starts out pretty good. Nowhere near as good as it could be if we got up to that 100% for someone that rehearses. And the next time we give the talk, it's actually a little bit better because we know the material.
That's where your data is really fake, because we rarely give the same talk more than once.
Well, yeah. Usually, yeah, there's just one data point on most of our talks. But, it keeps getting better over time, and I would say by the end, it gets pretty good. It still doesn't get perfect because we didn't carefully craft all of those sentences and paragraphs, but who has the time for that? Not us.
We're real, man.
Okay, so even though we are not rehearsing and scripting very carefully, we do know the content completely. Q&A, we talked about that before. I'll go past this. Have fun. This relates to projection and engagement in general. If you've ever been to a comedy show and you see the comic bombing, there are two ways that can go. One is that the comic feels that their entire life has been a waste of time up to this point.
Well, if they're a comedian, that's usually the case.
And they just kind of curl up, or maybe they get mad at the audience, and in either case, the audience does not want to be there, right? You feel bad for the comic and all you want to do is leave. If, on the other hand, they're bombing and they're okay with it, it's fine. Like, it's still enjoyable. Even if their jokes aren't landing, you know that they're having a good time and they can brush it off. Then it's just a conversation with the comic, and there's probably a joke coming up that'll work a little bit better. So have fun. Like, get to the point with giving talks that you actually enjoy it. It is a lot of fun. This is a kind of adrenaline that you get nowhere else in your life. It's a bit of a performance thing where there's that nervous energy supplying you the entire time. Actually have fun with it.
Right, and I think that's the good time to mention that we've been doing that for about 12 years, and we're still a little bit nervous when we're on stage. And most of the time on stage is spent having, there's two of us inside, there's the one person that gives the talk, and then the other person going, ah! But it's okay. It only lasts for about an hour, and then you're free.
Don't worry so much. It's really not that big a deal. I think, like, what is the worst that could happen when you give a tech talk? You could die, right? I mean, you could. You probably won't. And if you don't, then the worst thing didn't happen.
We have not so far.
And even if you do, then you're not even around to suffer from it. So it's really not a big deal. You're going to mess up some sentences. You're going to say, and you're going to say, You're going to forget some points. And it's totally fine. The main thing was that you had fun, you engaged the audience, and they learned more than they didn't.
And more seriously, the audience is on your side, the organizers are on your side, everybody wants to have a good time. I hope you are on our side. Are you on our side? Maybe I shouldn't have said that.
I should have a rule here that says don't pander to the audience. All right, rule number 4, these are guidelines, not laws. As Romain mentioned earlier, these are also things that work for us. This is our particular presentation style. You may have your own, that's totally fine. Whatever works for you, works. But consider some of these tips and consider just getting more practice and doing it more so that you get better. Let's see, oh, and also this applies more to me than to him. I find it important to always wear the same shirt.
Oh. And what he means by that, it is the same shirt. 12 years now, the same freaking shirt. Do you even wash it?
No comment.
You're disgusting.
Okay, so if I can summarize all of these slides, there's sort of 2 points. There's one about your material, reduce the clutter, simplify this thing so that the audience can get the point as quickly as possible, and you can actually impart the real knowledge to them.
Yeah, no, the next point, engage. There was a DevOps that was many years ago where someone proposed on stage, I think she was the speaker, or she was in the, no, she was in the audience, and this guy showed up at the end of a talk that one of our friends was giving, and he went on stage, he called her and proposed in front of 1,000 software engineers. That's not what we mean.
No.
I met my wife at a conference, but I did not ask her to marry me at a conference. Don't do that.
So I think we've blown way past the time that we had. There may or may not be time for Q&A. Before we do that, there is an article where I wrote down entirely too long an article with some of these thoughts.
You never shut up?
So if you're curious about more of this stuff, check it out there. If we do have time for Q&A, I think of this more as a discussion. As I said, everybody has their own style. Everybody has ideas or questions, and we'd be happy to take them or to break.
Also, a discussion is better with cake in your mouth.
He just cut me.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We would be happy to talk to you afterwards over cake. Thank you.
Thank you.